Assalamu alaikum dear students, welcome to a new video of mine with a new lecture on a new topic, and today's topic is related to Romantic age, 19th century Romantic age. And in Romantic age today we are going to discuss William Wordsworth as a romantic poet. So before going into details, what are the chief characteristics of William Wordsworth as a romantic poet, let's have an introduction to this topic. It is said that Romanticism is a very confusing kind of a term. No single definition can cover it up perfectly. Over the ages, different critics made efforts to define Romanticism, but they failed to define it in a scientific way, in a perfect manner. For me, Romanticism is a kind of a revolt, a kind of a rebellion against tradition and convention. It can also be called as a return to nature. Whatever is the definition of the term Romanticism, but it must be kept in mind that all romantic literature which has Romanticism in it has two important qualities in it. Number one, imagination. Number two, intense emotions and passions. Read or take up any romantic poet of 19th century English literature. All of them possess both these qualities abundantly. If you speak of Wordsworth or Coleridge or Southey or the latter generation of the romantics like John Keats, P.B. Shelley or Lord Byron, all of them, they are similar to each other as far as their imagination is concerned, as far as their intensity of emotions is concerned. So in this way, they are related to each other. They are bound to each other. So this is one of the aspects of romantic literature, that it is always based upon intense emotions and passions plus imagination. And these qualities are also found in the poetry of William Wordsworth as a romantic poet. So today we are going to discuss William Wordsworth as a romantic poet. The first important point related to the topic is Wordsworth's theory of poetry and poetic diction. Right? If you read Wordsworth's theory of poetry and poetic diction, then you will come to know that it is completely romantic in nature. His theory of poetry, his theory of poetic diction is romantic in nature. For example, his theory of poetry is, according to Wordsworth, poetry is spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Now these words of William Wordsworth, or this definition of William Wordsworth of poetry, clearly reflects romantic tendency in the poetry of William Wordsworth. Number one important term that is used by William Wordsworth in this definition is spontaneous. Any type of literature, romantic literature, take up any type of romantic literature, it has this quality of spontaneity or spontaneous. Same is true of William Wordsworth's poetry. It is highly spontaneous in nature. It is highly, effortless in nature. William Wordsworth, when he writes his poetry, he seems to be making least efforts in the creation of his poetry. So this spontaneity is one of the chiefest qualities of romantic movement or romanticism of 19th century. Second important thing that William Wordsworth over here says is powerful feelings, overflow of powerful feelings. Now, powerful feelings means intense emotions and passions. So William Wordsworth over here, like all the romantic poets, talks about intensity of emotions or expression of intensity of emotions in the field of poetry, in the genre of poetry. So William Wordsworth believes that poetry should be spontaneous, it should be based upon intense emotions and passions. And third important aspect of this definition of William Wordsworth is tranquility. Tranquility means peaceful environment. That poetry can be composed under peaceful environment in a peaceful situation. So this is, you can say that this aspect of William Wordsworth's theory of poetry is his personal one. Every poet might not have this perception, this approach towards the creation of poetry, but William Wordsworth believes that for the creation of good poetry, you must have tranquility, you must have peaceful environment. So this is his theory of poetry. Next is William Wordsworth's theory of poetic diction. Again, it is also based upon Romanticism. Very much like rest of the Romantic poets, or what Romantic movement says, William Wordsworth believes that there is no difference between the language of poetry and the language of common man. Right? Wordsworth believes that, in other words, the language of poetry should be absolutely simple. It should not be high-flown, it should not be bombastic, it should not be, sublime kind of a language. Rather, it should be the language that is used by a layman, a street man, a commoner in the village side. So he believes that there is a little of difference between the language of poetry and the language of the common man. In this regard, William Wordsworth, in a famous statement, says that poet is a man speaking to men in the language of men. So in this, according to this statement of William Wordsworth, poet is an ordinary person, not a special person, not some ghost or some supernatural being. Rather, he is a common human being with special qualities, special gifts and special abilities. Right? So he is a common man who speaks to common men in the language of common men. Language of common men means common speech, common language, not high-flown language as was believed previously by the new classics Alexander Pope and John Dryden. So William Wordsworth believes that language of poetry should be absolutely simple. If you take up his shorter lyrics like Daffodils and Solitary Reaper, all of them are based upon simplicity of language. Their language is absolutely simple. So Wordsworth not only has a theory of poetry, but he also practices it. Next important aspect of William Wordsworth's romantic poetry is use of romantic imagination. William Wordsworth, as I told you, uses romantic imagination in the writing of his poetry like all romantic literature, all romantic poetry. If you take up any romantic poet, John Keats, Shelley, Byron, Southey, Coleridge, all of them, they make use of their romantic imagination in the creation of their poetry. Same is done by William Wordsworth. When he creates his poetry, he uses romantic imagination. In the use of his romantic imagination, he is under the influence of transcendentalism as well. As I told you previously in my previous lecture that transcendentalism is a philosophy which believes that the world of senses only presents fact realities, apparent realities. They are not actual realities. Actual reality lies beyond the world of five senses. And this ultimate reality beyond the territory of five senses is discovered by William Wordsworth with the help of his romantic imagination. For example, in one of his poems, he says that I can see the face of God in a meanest flower. In other words, he wants to say that I can see the beautiful face of God in a minor kind of a flower, in an ordinary most kind of a flower. Now, what enabled him to see the face of God in the apparent reality, which is a minor flower? It was his imagination, romantic imagination. With the help of his romantic imagination, he sees the face of God in a minor flower. So again, he also finds, some of the moral aspects. He discovers some of the moral truths from nature with the help of the use of romantic imagination. Now, what is this moral truth? This is the ultimate reality that lies beyond the territory of five senses. And what reveals this ultimate truth to William Wordsworth? His romantic imagination. For example, in one of his poems, he says that one impulse from vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good than all the sages can. In other words, William Wordsworth wants to say that we can find morality or moral teachings more in nature than in the thousands of the lectures of wise men. So what helps him to see this moral truth in nature that he cannot find in the lectures of sages or wise men? It is his romantic imagination. So he uses his romantic imagination to reach the ultimate reality, the final reality. So this is how he uses his romantic imagination and comes across the ultimate truth. There is also the element of pantheism and mysticism in the poetry of William Wordsworth as a romantic poet, right? Now, what is the meaning of pantheism? Pantheism is based upon basically three words. Number one is pan, number two is the, number three is ism. Pan mean all, the mean God, ism mean philosophy. It means all God philosophy. In other words, in simple words, everything in nature is the reflection of God, is the reflection of its creator. Now, this pantheism is developed by William Wordsworth in his poetry with the help of his imagination. He uses his imagination and finds the reflection of God in all the objects of nature. He believes that not only each and every object of nature possesses an individual soul, but there runs a supreme being, there runs a bigger soul through all the objects of nature, uniting them into a single whole. He calls this being supreme being, right? Now, what helps him to see this supreme being in nature? His romantic imagination, right? In this way, the moment William Wordsworth discovers personality of God in all the objects of nature, same personality of God, one personality of God in all the objects of nature, it means he finds unity in diversity. He feels that all the objects of nature are diverse and different from one another, altogether different from one another, but still there's a unity in them. There's a similarity among them. And what is that similarity? The supreme being, the reflection of God, the personality of God, the face of God, which William Wordsworth sees with the help of his romantic imagination. So this is pantheism, that he sees God in everything. So pantheism is the next important aspect of his romantic poetry, which is revealed to him by his romantic imagination. Then mysticism is also there in his poetry. What is mysticism? Mysticism is traveling from apparent reality to the heart of actual reality. Traveling from apparent reality to the ultimate reality, final reality, right? Apparent reality is the creations of God. And what is the ultimate reality? Real reality. Real reality is the creator of all the creations of the universe, the nature. Now, Wordsworth has this mysticism. He, with the help of his mysticism, travels from apparent reality and reaches out at the heart of actual reality with the help of what? With the help of his romantic imagination. He sees the face of God in a meanest flower. A meanest flower, ordinary flower, is apparent reality, and the face of God reflected by it is the ultimate reality. This is called mysticism. Next important characteristic of William Wordsworth's romantic poetry is love of nature and its beauty. Like all the romantics, William Wordsworth loves nature and the beauty in the nature. In all the forms and shapes, he sees beauty in nature and enjoys it and describes it in the world of his poetry. And Wordsworth is said to be one of the most original poets of nature, in the sense that the way he treated nature in the world of his poetry, no other poet in English literature did so. Which is why he is said to be the worshipper of nature, the high priest of nature. Nature is not a passing passion with William Wordsworth. It is everything for William Wordsworth. Nature is the breath and soul of William Wordsworth's poetry. Right? His characters are natural, his settings are natural, his objects are natural, his themes are taken from nature. Everything in the poetry of William Wordsworth is taken from nature. And he also talks about the beauties of nature in relation to the different objects of nature. He listens to various sounds in nature. He sees beautiful colors and shapes and forms in nature. He tastes various types of fruits in nature. He smells different types of fragrances in nature and enjoys nature through his five senses. He also intellectualizes nature. He also spiritualizes nature and enjoys nature through his intellect as well as through his spirituality. Next important aspect of William Wordsworth's romantic poetry is love of past and escapism. William Wordsworth, like rest of the romantics, loves past. Remember that romantics are never in good terms with contemporaneity or their own times, their present times. They either talk about the future or they talk about the past, or they create an imaginary abode and take refuge over there, in this way running away from the harsh realities of life. This is true of William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth, very much like rest of the romantics, he loves past, right? He talks about past in the world of his poetry. He talks about the primitive simplicity, the old simplicity in the world of his poetry. He glorifies the primitive simplicity in the world of his poetry. He says that there is only one way to bring back the old simplicity in life, austerity in life, and that is having returned to nature. Live as much closer to nature as is possible. Be a natural being. So this is what William Wordsworth believes. So in this way he shows his love of past. And he also takes refuge in the lap of nature from the harsh realities of life. As he is not in good terms with the present times of his life, the contemporaneity, the harsh realities of life, so he escapes and takes refuge in the lap of nature. And he finds consolation, peace and tranquility in the lap of nature. He enjoys different things in nature, sounds in nature, tastes in nature, fragrances in nature, sights in nature, enjoys nature through his five senses, through his intellect, through his spirituality, and in this way finds a beautiful escape from the harsh realities of life. So in this way, William Wordsworth, very much like rest of the romantics, he has an element of escapism in the world of his poetry. So this is the last but not the least characteristic of William Wordsworth as a romantic poet. I hope today's lecture would give you a lot of benefit and advantage in your studies. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.